The Hypersonic Combined Test Force at Edwards is gearing up for the first flight of the X-51A Wave Rider flight test vehicle in the spring of 2010.
What we are going to do is we're going to take the X-51 Wave Rider. We're going to launch that from a B-52 at 50,000 feet over the Pacific Ocean, and then the vehicle is going to drop away. It's going to be accelerated by a solid rocket booster up to about Mach 4.5, at which time the solid rocket booster will drop away and the vehicle and the engine which is being tested is going to ignite and then further accelerate that vehicle up to Mach 6.
The engine being tested on the 51A is a hypersonic scramjet propulsion system.
A scramjet is an engine that has no internal moving parts, that it takes the air in, you mix fuel in it, and it automatically burns. Because of the high speed, high temperature that you get in flight, it now is able to produce a thrust.
Teams of testers have put in years of work leading up to the first flight of the X-51A.
It's a fairly complicated test. The altitude is right at the very top of B-52 capabilities. We also have chase, so they have to be there as well. The telemetry has to be relayed from Naval Station Point Mugu. We have to have a control room with about 35 people all watching the various telemetry. So there's a lot of teamwork aspects to this whole project.
Testers say the purpose behind this program is to demonstrate the ability to use air-breathing hydrocarbon propulsion in the hypersonic flight regime, which is flight more than 5 times the speed of sound.
What makes that a challenge for us and why we need to do the research is that conventional turbine engines are basically limited to about Mach 2.5 or 2.5 times the speed of sound. And it's really tough from the pressure and the heat and the aerodynamic loads on the conventional engines to get anywhere past about Mach 2.5. The scramjet on this X-51 will be able to take in air at flight speeds of over Mach 4 and up to Mach 6 and take air from the atmosphere, burn it, and then use it for thrust. And if we get that capability, we'll be able to apply this technology to many other flight applications that the Air Force might use.
The testing of hypersonic technology at Edwards is not new. There was the X-15 program that first flew in 1959, and there has been very little other activity since. But today's advancements in technology are giving testers a new edge.
Well, we've been working on scramjets in the United States Air Force for the past 50 years. Matter of fact, there was a program back in the 90s called the National Aerospace Plane that worked on scramjet engine technology before. But because of those high pressures and those high temperatures that I talked about with scramjet engines, the technology of the materials and the propulsion and how to handle those high temperatures was not ready. So we have finally come to the point of doing propulsion research that we're ready to go fly a scramjet engine and demonstrate that it's a very viable propulsion concept to power aerospace vehicles.
As scramjet technology is developed, testers believe that in the near future it could be used to aid warfighters as a weapons delivery system. Further down the road, it is believed it will make space access easier.
The far-term application really is all about spacelift, and this is the one that I think in the Air Force Research Lab we're most excited about. And I like to tell people, if you think about the shuttle is basically how we get a lot of our payload up into space now, replenish the space station and things like that. The shuttle has to carry along all of its oxidizer for the propulsion concept, so it's a pure rocket system. If we could incorporate scramjet engine technology in our spacelift systems, as the rockets or the vehicles that go up through the atmosphere, they could acquire the air through air-breathing engines through the atmosphere, and you wouldn't have to carry those tanks to carry oxidizers. So therefore, it makes the propulsion cycle much more efficient. And then instead of carrying oxidizer, they could carry more payload to space.
Teams from the Air Force Flight Test Center, the Air Force Research Laboratory, Boeing, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, NASA, Pratt & Whitney Rocketdyne, and the U.S. Navy are working with the Hypersonic Combined Test Force on the X-51A Wave Rider test project. For Mr. Johnny Armstrong, who has worked with hypersonics at Edwards since the early 1960s, the X-51A project is one of the highlights of his career.
For me personally, this is a real reward towards the end of a career where I've worked hypersonics and now all of a sudden this program is here. I'm able after 32 years since the X-15 last flew, I'm able to go back into a control room and experience a hypersonic flight test program.
10 seconds. Coming down. How's it looking?
Good.
Sorry.
At the front.
Still got it?
Yeah, I do.
There it goes. Looks like separation. And all on switches. You see it still?
I think it's gone.
I think it's naval torch copies NASA. To run, understand we're clear to event 4.
That is affirmative. You're clear for event 4, the hot pass.
Torch switches. Okay, you good?
I'm good. Just trying to hold it still.
30 seconds.
May 26, when testers from Edwards Air Force Base and the Air Force Research Laboratory successfully launched an X-51A Wave Rider scramjet off the California coast. Based on preliminary data, after booster separation at 50,000 feet, the air-breathing scramjet vehicle approached Mach 5 at an altitude of more than 60,000 feet. The previous record was 12 seconds in the NASA X-43. Mr. Johnny Armstrong is the chief engineer of the Hypersonic Combined Test Force at Edwards and has worked for more than 30 years in the development of scramjet technology.
This was a repeat experience for me to be part of a control room activity of a hypersonic vehicle, and this one you approach with a lot of anticipation. You know how complicated, how challenging this particular trajectory was on the X-51 to fly into a very high dynamic pressure to get the conditions to start a scramjet. So this was very much a challenge, something we were concerned about, and it made it successfully. To that point, started that engine and flew for a significant period of time at a Mach number approaching Mach 5.
The X-51 was carried aloft at 50,000 feet by an Edwards B-52 Stratofortress over the Point Mugu Naval Air Warfare Center Sea Range. Flying at that altitude was just one of the challenges the B-52 crew had to face during the mission.
To get it into the launch box, we're at the upper envelope edges for the B-52. We're at 50,000 feet. We're flying at near our max Mach in a place where our aircraft doesn't really control very well. Very rare air, so for us, making the exact parameters, within plus or minus a couple of knots or within a few hundred feet of where we needed to be was extremely challenging for the B-52. We had to fly the aircraft at minimum fuel, so every minute that we're up there, we're just a few short minutes away from having to land immediately because we don't have enough gas to make it all the way back to Edwards. So small changes in the flight path or changes in our direction from anyone or any kind of conflict, because we're flying through LA Center's airspace, which is full of a lot of airline traffic, could have ended the mission. So it was, you're always on the razor's edge for fuel, which I thought was a unique challenge to the program as well.
Major Sean Selly was one of the two navigators in the B-52. While he was responsible for releasing the X-51 at the right moment, he says that it was a team effort that made it all happen.
Many hours of hard work, and everyone from the control room personnel to the maintenance to the cast of hundreds supporting this mission, to the engineers, making it all happen for that one moment in time.
Right after the mission, that team started the task of reviewing all the flight data.
We're starting to look at data today. We just are real anxious to get in there to look at some of the strange things that you see along a flight like this, to try to explain them. Where you need to make changes, you got to define those changes to get ready to go and do it again.
Lieutenant Colonel Todd Venema is the director of the Hypersonic Combined Test Force.
Well, everything we do at Edwards is flight test, and a lot of what we do is weapon systems and the short to middle term, helping the warfighter more directly. This is more of a long-term thing. The things that we're working on in the scramjet engine are going to benefit the warfighter 15, 20 years from now when we're able to utilize this technology to bring new capabilities to the fight. It's exciting, though. It's exciting to do research. It's the type of thing that we read about when we wanted to become test pilots. Chuck Yeager breaking the sound barrier and the X-15 program and those types of things. And it's really terrific to be a part of a program like that.
A second test of the X-51A Wave Rider flew June 13th in the Point Mugu Naval Air Test Range over the Pacific Ocean, bringing significant hypersonic research data in a less than successful flight test. The hypersonic aircraft was successfully boosted to just over Mach 5 and the scramjet engine lit, but failed to transition to full power. According to Air Force Flight Test Center officials, after a flawless flight from Edwards Air Force Base, a U.S. Air Force B-52H Stratofortress released the experimental vehicle from an altitude of approximately 50,000 feet. After release, the X-51A was initially accelerated by a solid rocket booster to a speed of just over Mach 5. The experimental aircraft's air-breathing scramjet engine lit on ethylene and attempted to transition to JP-7 fuel operation when the vehicle experienced an inlet unstart. The hypersonic vehicle attempted to restart and oriented itself to optimize engine start conditions, but was unsuccessful. The Wave Rider continued in a controlled flight orientation until it flew into the ocean within the test range. Engineers from the Air Force Research Laboratory, Boeing, and Pratt & Whitney Rocketdyne are now reviewing the large amount of telemetry data collected during the test flight.
The flight of the Air Force's X-51A Wave Rider aircraft ended prematurely Tuesday. Air Force officials say the X-51 was launched from a B-52 bomber over the Pacific Ocean. But about 15 seconds into the flight, a fault was identified in one of the Wave Rider's control fins, causing the aircraft to plummet into the ocean. The flight was meant to be a test for the Wave Rider's hypersonic scramjet engine. The X-51 is designed to travel at Mach 6 or 6 times the speed of sound over a 5-minute period. A previous Wave Rider test was more successful. In May 2010, the X-51 flew for more than 3 minutes at nearly 5 times the speed of sound. Only one of the 4 Wave Riders aircraft remains.